In the aftermath of the First Tyrannic War, the Ultramarines faced a rather important task, securing the borders to the realm, in particular since Ultramar had been ravaged significantly, and they would also have to do this while rebuilding their losses, as they had lost the entirety of their first company, and the rest of them weren't looking too good either. So in order to be able to successfully do this, they launched a series of incursions, primarily starting with the 4th Company due to it having the fewest numbers of casualties, as the ones to lead the charge. Their first mission was a conflict involving the liberation of Voron's world, a shrine world of the Ecclesiarchy, which had almost in its totality been seized by the orc warlord known as the Archmechanic of Cabela, who had enslaved its population and defiled its holy temples. To the Ultramarines, such blasphemy could not be tolerated, so Captain Idus once again would lead his men into battle, utilizing a combination of disciplined tactics directly drawn from the Codex Astartes and an adaptability that was in general unprecedented within the current Ultramarines in order to adapt to in order to manage the unpredictable nature of the orcs. Through a series of swift strikes, the 4th Company was able to successfully circumvent orc strongpoints and cripple their enemies' ability to defend vital infrastructure, because even the orcs relied on supply chains and infrastructures to fight. The orc forces, now spread thin and overextended, would be overwhelmed by the combined force of the Ultramarines and the Astra Militarum Jovian Hussars, who would successfully bring down the greenskin threat, with surprisingly few casualties. But it was during the liberation of Von's world that a young space marine named Uriel Ventress attracted the attention of Captain Eidris. Uriel descended from the legendary line of Lucian Ventress, who had died fighting the Tyranids beneath the polar fortresses of Macragge nearly 180 years prior, which to unaugmented humans would be an extreme amount of time, but to an Astartes it's the blink of an eye, demonstrated an extraordinary amount of courage in battle. When his sergeant was slain by the orc warlord, Uriel seized command of his squad and led them with a bravery that surpassed even the highest expectations for an Ultramarine of his rank, thereby showing that Uriel's future would be one of greatness. With the world liberated, the 4th Company turned its attention to the northern borders of Ultramar. Over the next 5 standard years, they carried out numerous interdiction attacks along with boarding actions, preventing further raids from infiltrating the realm. Operating aboard the honor-bound strike cruiser Bea Victus under the command of Laszlo Tiberius, the company's reputation for relentless action and success grew significantly. Captain Tiberius, a veteran himself of the Tyrannic Wars, led his men in the destruction of over 300 enemy vessels, further solidifying the company's banner and their legend in the Ultramarines' battle honors. During this period, the 4th Company would return to Macragge for the solemn observations at the Temple of Correction, where the stasis-sealed form of Primarch Roboute Guilliman lay under the vigilance of his honor-bound chapter. With their strength slowly returning, the 4th Company inducted new recruits and would thereby be able to gain full combat readiness significantly faster than they normally would. Once again, they stood prepared for actions beyond the borders of their home. Meanwhile, in the Primaris Corps, a new crisis would emerge. A massive space hulk known as the Flame of Iniquity threatened to overrun several critical forge worlds. This was lifeblood of the Imperium's war machine, and a threat to it could not be taken lightly. This conglomeration of derelict starships posed an incredible risk to the Adeptus Mechanicus, who then immediately called upon the Ultramarines for aid. With the 4th Company now fully restored, it was dispatched directly to deal with this growing menace. Upon arriving to the Primaris Corps, the 4th Company boarded the Flame of Iniquity, which was a vast labyrinth of structures, twisted wrecks, and misshapen hallways, which they dealt with by destroying its inner workings, literally and figuratively carving out a path through the ship. The orcs aboard the Hulk would then be scattered and be unable to mount a significant resistance. This victory would become a pivotal moment in the company's history, which allowed the chapter as a whole to earn the gratitude of the Adeptus Mechanicus, further solidifying their standing within the greater Imperium. The 4th Company of the Ultramarines would then gain even further recognition, as Inquisitor Markov, recognizing the skills and disciplines of Eidris' warriors, urgently petitioned the chapter master Marnius Calgar for assistance. This was a matter of grave importance, one that required the might and precision which he believed only the Ultramarines could provide. Heeding the Inquisitor's call, Calgar consented to the release of the 4th Company in its totality into the Inquisition service for a time. Their destination was the distant world of Epsilon Regis, a world which would later become infamous for the involvement of the notorious witch hunter Tyrus. The precise events surrounding the Ultramarines' deployment to Epsilon remain a closely guarded secret by the Inquisition and the chapter. What transpired on the world remains largely veiled, primarily by the Order Hereticus, and thereby there are few, if any, official records available. However, following this mysterious operation, the Fourth Company was once again thrust into action, this time on the distant world of Horvath. Here they were tasked with purging the indigenous life forms to facilitate the colonization of the planet by an Adeptus Mechanicus Explorator team. While some Ultramarines viewed the task with disdain, considering it beneath their noble status as warriors of the Emperor, none dared openly criticize or defy Chapter Master Marnius Calgar. The purging itself was executed swiftly. As was customary for the Ultramarines, they left the world perfect for the arrival of the Mechanicus. The aftermath of the purge led to the Fourth Company being called upon to serve once again. This time they were to join the Chapter Master in the Black Crusade. This coalition force, composed of several Space Marine chapters, would be assembled in order to respond to a disturbing threat emerging from the Tau Empire. The Tau, along with their Kroot allies and Turalian mercenaries, had launched a concerted attack onto Imperial-held space, demanding that the inhabitants of their captured world swear allegiance to the Tau Empire or face the consequences. Such brazen aggression could not be allowed to stand, which led Calgar to initiate a swift and brutal campaign alongside his allies in order to crush this nascent Xenos Empire expansion. The Fourth Company, ever at the forefront of the fighting for the Ultramarines, played a key role in eliminating the Tau threat and re-establishing Imperial dominance within the region. Their efforts were instrumental in ensuring the survival of the Imperium's sovereignty, as the challenge of repelling alien invaders grew more complex. The Fourth Company would soon face yet another insidious threat, the return of the Tyranids, along with Hive Fleet Behemoth. Though they had repelled it years earlier, they had not been so naive to believe that it was a threat, that it was the end of this Xenos threat. In a cruel twist of fate, the Tyranids returned, this time having reformed from a splinter of Hive Fleet Kraken. Unlike their previous assault, which had come in the form of a massive overwhelming force, Kraken had a more subtle and insidious methodology in their attacks. With a series of smaller splinter fleets, the Tyranid advanced across an even wider front, drawing the Ultramarines into another horrific conflict, one that was designed to spread them thin. The target this time seemed to be the industrial world of Icar 4, an important stronghold for the Imperium, and the Fourth Company once again found themselves leading the vanguard into battle. This time, though, they would not fight alone. They would fight alongside the Astra Militarum, but also along with other Space Marines drawn from exactly 7 chapters, as they would form a united front against this overwhelming alien threat. The fighting was fierce, and the Ultramarines understood that it would be relentless, but they had been bolstered by their allies, who themselves had learned their own peculiar methodologies dealing with Tyranids. Both Captain Idris and Ural Ventress, who had previously distinguished themselves throughout this campaign, would be awarded the prestigious Imperial Laurel for actions of valor. The Tyranids would ultimately be repelled from Icor 4, but the battle was far from over. As Hive Fleet Kraken withdrew, it would break into several more smaller splinter fleets, and it remains uncertain where each and every one of these splinter fleets would go or if they would be destroyed. Some are known to have penetrated deep into the galactic core, reaching as far as Segmentum Solar, but they would be annihilated swiftly by the Navis Imperialis battle fleets protecting Segmentum Solar. However, the question in the Ultramarines' minds is, did all of Kraken's fleets meet their end, or are there remnants lurking in the darkest corners of the galaxy? From here, the Ultramarines, with their unyielding dedication to the Emperor, alongside their unshakable resolve, would once again prove their worth in the defense of the Imperium. Having fought with valor against the Tyranid threat, the Tau invaders, and the Orc menace, they became seen as the bulwark against the forces that threatened to destroy humanity. Their legacy of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering, unmitigated commitment to duty became widespread and known to almost every Imperial citizen. However, there were other forces lurking in the horizon, much like they always would be. After the hard-fought battles at Icar 4, the 4th company of the Ultramarines found themselves dispatched once again to an increasingly perilous threat. This time, the mission took them to Trarusa, where reports indicated the Night Lords had been popping up and had established a more permanent presence within this segment of space. The mission required them to provide the best warriors the Imperium could muster, and the 4th company were said warriors. The Astra Militarum had already begun their advance towards the planetary capital controlled by the Night Lords, encountering fierce resistance as they moved forward. Yet despite the tenacity of the enemy, they continued to be crushed by the opposition of the Imperium. However, as the campaign went on, the Imperial lines began to stretch thin and became vulnerable to flanking assaults. Recognizing this perilous situation, the 4th company took decisive action once again, targeting vital points that could allow the enemy to assault and disrupt their forces. In a tragic yet heroic act, Captain Idris sacrificed himself in order to destroy the final coalesced enemy force, ensuring the safety of not only his commanders but the stability of the Imperial position. With the loss of their beloved captain, the 4th company mourned, but duty called. The company would then be returned to Macragge, where veteran Sergeant Uriel Ventress would be elevated to the rank of captain, taking the mantle of leadership from Idris. Following this, there would be another incident that would call upon the 4th company. This would occur within the northern reaches of Segmentum Tempestus. Their destination, Tristis Ultra, a planet with deep ties to the Ultramarines, once brought into Imperial compliance by Roboute Guilliman during the Great Crusade. This world had a rich history of loyalty to the Ultramarines and to the Imperium. Unfortunately, they would face a direct threat. A gargantuan space hulk was detected drifting towards their planet, and Captain Ventress, alongside his warriors, would lead the assault into its steps. The Ultramarines had encountered such derelict ships before, but this one held a greater danger, one far more dastardly than could have ever been expected, a deadly Xenos infestation, as the Ultramarines fought to clear the massive vessel room by room, each section filled with a litany of Xenos scum. After the tremendous effort of the Ultramarines, they would emerge victorious. They would escape to safety and see to the destruction of the Space Hulk from the safety of their ship, the Vae Victus. Yet as the Ultramarines stood victorious, an ominous sign emerged. The vessel's astropaths detected a disturbing phenomena, a wave of warp interference moving towards the Imperium. This disturbance, once known as the Shadow in the Warp, could only mean one thing: another Tyranid Hive Fleet was invading. This time, it was Leviathan. With the threat of Hive Fleet Leviathan imminent, the Ultramarines moved quickly to assemble a response team, which would include making contact with the Mortifactors, a Space Marine chapter whose tactics and culture diverged significantly from the ideals of Roboute Guilliman, embracing darker and more death-like aspects, including forming a religion and ignoring the Codex Astartes almost in its entirety, to the point that some believe that this Space Marine chapter is actually descended from the Death Guard. However, the two chapters were in fact able to form a coalition to confront the Tyranid menace. A fleet was quickly assembled under the command of Navis Imperialis Admiral Brigid de Court, with the battleship Argus at its helm. They would seek out and destroy the infestation. The fleet itself would be bolstered by the presence of ancient and revered warships, including the Sword of Retribution and the Carlos Vinicians, both of which were legendary ships who had served in the defense of the Imperium for generations. As the Ultramarines prepared for their impending battle, it was clear that the galaxy now stood at a knife's edge. The Tyranid threat was once again on the rise, and only the Ultramarines, alongside with their allies, could hope to ever stem the tide of destruction that was approaching. The question was whether their combined strength was enough to fend off wave after wave of Tyranids, or if this new iteration of a Hive Fleet would spell the Imperium's doom. In the face of this Tyranid threat, the Imperium would also mobilize its forces, including the Death Corps of Krieg, alongside the largest regiment of the Astra Militarum, and planetary defense forces drawn from Tristis Ultra, who were trained in the martial methods of the Ultramarines under the watchful eye of Sergeant Lycrus, to the point that they could operate seamlessly alongside the Ultramarines. In particular, the Ultramarines also called upon those who had experienced the Tyranid menace previously, lending their wisdom to the planet's defense forces. To further bolster the forces on the ground, an elite Death Watch kill team, led by the renowned Watch Captain Bannon, joined the efforts. Despite the odds, Tristis Ultra was as secure as it could be made within the given time frame. The battle began on the outer reaches of the star system, where the Hive Fleet's elements were confronted directly. While the world of Barbarous Prime was lost to the Tyranids, a decisive victory was won against the advancing fleet, buying time for the Imperium as a whole. goal. As the Hive Fleet pushed forwards towards the Imperium's defenses, Kripman made a difficult decision to sacrifice the world of Kraldus, ordering the mortar-factors to virus bomb the planet from orbit, before the Tyranids could even stand a chance and assimilate the biomass. Though there were fractures growing amongst the Imperial commanders, the defenders of Traces Ultra remained united. The relentless assault of the Tyranids, however, pushed them to the very limits. Despite overwhelming losses, including the decimation of almost the entirety of the 4th Company, the defenders refused to yield. Captain Ventress, in a desperate bid to end the invasion, took an unprecedented step, casting aside the teachings of the Codex Astartes, heresy to many Ultramarines. He assumed command of the Deathwatch kill team and led them in their final mission to deliver a lethal gene poison directly to the heart of the last remaining Hive ship. With his prior experience in serving alongside the Deathwatch, Captain Ventress knew that this was a pivotal moment which would have the greatest impact possible on the battlefield, which made it a better option than dogmatically following the Codex Astartes. The mission was perilous, leading the Ultramarines and their Deathwatch allies through the heart of the nightmarish horrors of Tyranid biology. But in the end they succeeded, and the gene poison was introduced into the body of a Tyranid Norn Queen. This was one of, if not the most crucial figure within the Tyranids' hive mind. The death of the Norn Queen sent shockwaves throughout the entirety of this Hive Fleet segment, causing the Tyranid organisms to enter a frenzied state of self-destruction, almost as if the Tyranids aren't an exact race, but they are pre-programmed weapons, but rather than made out of metal, they are made out of biologically existent matter. And though the Tyranid fleet was finally defeated, the scars of their invasion would ever remain on the surface of Traces Ultra. With the defense concluded, the 4th Company would then return to Macragge, its warriors wary and mourning severe losses. Though their honor was intact, the aftermath of their actions at Traces Ultra would lead to an unexpected and potentially catastrophic consequence. Captain Ventress, for his explicit and knowing breach of the Codex Astartes, found himself facing the charges of heresy. Rather than facing an immediate execution, Ventress was given a death oath by Marnius Calgar, the chapter master of the Ultramarines, as he, alongside his trusted companion, Sergeant Pennius Lysine, would be tasked with locating a place of dark iron. However, the journey that they would soon follow would lead them to a far darker and more dangerous reality than what they ever anticipated. Shortly after departing Macragge on their starship, they would be ambushed by warp entities, which were under the control of a demon imprisoned within a demon engine, known as the Homophilus Daemonium. This massive grotesque machine resembled a massive steam locomotive that had the ability to travel between the warp and real space at will. Captured and taken deep into the Eye of Terrace, Ventress and Pentheus found themselves transported to Murdengrad, the demon world of the Iron Warriors, which just by serendipity was the location that they were sent to find. It was here that the 2 Space Marines were forced into a brutal alliance with a group of Space Marine renegades and 2 former Imperial Guardsmen who escaped the enslavement of the Iron Warriors, alongside with a series of other slaves. This guerrilla band would engage in hit-and-run attacks against the Iron Warriors' captors, but their struggle came at a great cost. Ultimately, Ventress and his companions would be captured by the legendary Warsmith Hansu, a commander of the Iron Warriors who at least partly hailed from Imperial Fist's lineage. Ventress would then be subjected to a horrific fate as he was implanted into one of the wombs of the Demonculaba, a grotesque creature that was designed to accelerate the creation and growth of Chaos Space Marines. A woman's body, particular parts of it specifically, had been modified using Imperial Fist gene seed stolen to create new warriors for the Iron Warriors Legion. The irony would not be lost on Ventress or his companion, since the Demonculaba were the very things that they were sent to find and destroy. This monstrous technology was an abomination of everything, including the methodology of creating Space Marines. The Iron Warriors, having been unable to replace their fallen numbers in the wake of the Horus Heresy, used horrific procedures to replenish their ranks with new genetically altered soldiers, creating even darker reflections of the Space Marines that once served the God Emperor. And while they were able to replenish their numbers quickly, the quality of the Space Marines themselves suffered significantly. The very fate of Captain Ventress and Sergeant Lysine, alongside with their compatriots, seemed rather uncertain. However, one thing was clear to them, that the Iron Warriors would stop at nothing in order to see their numbers replenished. Amidst the chaos of war and betrayal, which is synonymous with the traitor legions, the ambitions of Warsmith Hansu found themselves besieged by rival Iron Warrior Warsmiths. His refusal to surrender his share of Imperial Fist gene seed stock taken from the Adeptus Mechanicus on the world of Hydra Cardatus during an invasion sparked a conflict as the Iron Warriors clashed over the precious genetic resource necessary due to the corruption of chaos within the warp, tainting and damaging their own gene seed, caused Hansu's grip on his stronghold to weaken significantly as he became embroiled in a struggle not only against his fellow traitor marines but against the fate that he believed he deserved. In the midst of this turmoil, Ventress and Lysan, who had been imprisoned within this fortress, saw their opportunity to escape. The two Ultramarines fought their way through the Iron Warriors' fortress, successfully destroying Hansu's labs and his stronghold in the process. However, the act came at a dire cost, one that would forever change the course of history. In their desperate bid for freedom, Ventress and Lysan were forced to release a Cornate Demon Prince, a powerful and destructive entity. The Demon Prince, once freed, lay complete destruction and waste to Hansu's rival's forces, first annihilating a rival demon which had been imprisoned within the Omophilus Daemonium, then turning his ire and fury upon the warsmiths, besieging Hansu's fortress. The demon's carnage drew the enemies of Hansu into full retreat, leaving his fortress. With the unwitting help of the Demon Prince, Ventress and Lysan, alongside a group of the Unfleshed, mutant rejects of the Iron Warriors and twisted experiments of Hansu's own design, escaped the Eye of Terror, and they did so aboard the remains of the Omnius Demonium, which, having been purged from its demonic taint, reverted back to its former state as a starship. The group found themselves traveling throughout the warp, only to arrive at the troubled world of Selenus, specifically a forbidden zone that emanated with a suffocating sense of death. Upon their arrival, Ventress and Lysan encountered a local group of Astra Militarum, the ruling force of Selenus, alongside their rather mysterious governor, a figure whose ruthlessness and ambition was matched only by his suspicion of strangers. The pair requested assistance in returning to Macragge, but their astropathic message would be intercepted by a group of Grey Knights who had been targeting and monitoring the world for their own eclectic reasons. Eventually, a Grey Knight squad would arrive and promptly arrested the two Ultramarines, subjecting them to an intensive series of trials designed to test their purity. The trials were grueling both physically and mentally, as the Grey Knights sought to determine whether Ventress or Lysan had been tainted by their exposure to the forces of chaos during their time on Murdengrad. In a shocking turn of events, it was discovered that a powerful psyker was likely the instigator behind the Demonium's arrival on Selenus, had used the Unfleshed as instruments of revenge against the planetary governor and his own former regiment. This vendetta stemmed from the regiment's past atrocities, specifically the murder of tens of thousands of civilians, including the obliteration of an entire town which had at one time been the home to the leader of a small group of guerrilla fighters. The campaign itself had been ignited by the brutal actions of the governor, which went far and beyond what even the Ultramarines would normally stand. The town had suffered a fate so horrible that it led to the foundation of the Forbidden Zone where Ventress and Lysan had initially arrived. Possessed by the malevolent psyker, the Unfleshed went on a rampage of slaughter, killing anyone who was within their path. However, they were eventually brought down by Ventress and Lysan alongside the Grey Knights. With the tragic death of the Unfleshed, this chapter in Ventress's story would end with a subsequent return to Macragge. Upon their return to Macragge, Ventress and Lycurus were immediately subjected to even more scrutiny. Both would be carefully examined by the chief librarian in order to ensure that their exposure to chaos had not left lasting corruption. The trials were indeed harsh, but the verdict was once again clear. The two warriors were untainted, and their loyalty to the Emperor unbroken. With this judgment, Captain Ventress was reinstated as the leader of the Fourth Company, alongside being given the opportunity to redeem himself in the eyes of those who still doubted him. His first test would come on the world of Pavonis, where he was tasked with defending the planet from an invading force of Tau. This mission, while seemingly the chance for redemption, would prove to be only the beginning of the even more trials for the legendary Uriel Ventress. In contrast to Ventress's reinstatement, Lysan was forced to endure a much harsher fate. He was demoted and stripped of his rank, alongside being subjected to harsh punishment. 100 solar days of isolation from the Ultramarines was the punishment that he was prescribed. This punishment was a direct result of Lysan's failure to disclose the unusual regenerative capabilities of his bionic arm, an arm that had been replaced after the devastating loss of his biological one during the Ultramarines' mission on Pavionis, when he had encountered the Catan command shard known as the Nightbringer. The Nightbringer's power had apparently infused his new bionic limb with necrodermis, a living metal of the Necrons, which was seen as a dangerous and unpredictable substance, which ironically was the same substance that covered the hands of the Iron Hands Primarch Ferrus Manus. Lythrian had kept this information hidden, and for his transgressions, he was punished severely. After his 100 days of isolation, he was reinstated as a battle brother of the 4th Company and rejoined Ventress. Meanwhile, the vengeful Hansu, consumed with his hatred for Ventress and the Ultramarines due to their destruction of his fortress and forces on Murdengrad, plotted revenge against them, specifically targeting Tressus Ultra, the very world that Ventress had so harshly to defend. Hansu, alongside his band of Iron Warriors, Chaos Cultists, and Traitor Marines, alongside various other mercenaries, had unleashed a catastrophic assault upon the planet, turning it into a dead world. In addition to his warband, Hansu gathered a host of Drukhari pirates, Kroot mercenaries, and Dark Mechanicum forces, led by the traitorous Magos Siren. Together they launched a devastating campaign against Tressus Ultra, seeking to annihilate the world that the Ultramarines had sworn to protect, and with it the legacy of Captain Uriel Ventress. The stage was then set for another epic conflict that would push Ventress and the Ultramarines further than they had been tested ever before. In a dramatic turn of events, the campaign orchestrated by Hansu would also be aided by forces he had been gifted by the legendary and potentially the greatest single War Master of Chaos, Huron Blackheart. With these additional forces, he set his sights on the Ultramar subsector. His particular target was a star fort, hidden for over 60 years in the uncharted depths of space. This fortress was guarded by a garrison of Ultramarines, and it was designed to protect the realm of Ultramar as a whole. This is where Hansu's plan would unfold, setting the stage for an explosive clash with his newly amassed forces. After tracking down and boarding the star fort, Hansu slaughtered the Ultramarines defending it, leaving the structures vulnerable to his machinations. In an act of daring, he freed a captive demon prince, a being of immense power and hatred known as Makar, a former word-bearer Dark Apostle, who had once waged war on Ultramar during the Horus Heresy. Makar had previously been imprisoned by Chapter Master Marnius Calgar and the Inquisition, alongside the Inquisition. After his earlier attempts to annihilate the Ultramarines, he had brooded in a prison of his own making for centuries. His release by Hansu was not only a strategic victory, but it was also the beginning of a revenge-fueled pact that would reverberate throughout the realms of Ultramar. Once freed, Makar possessed the remnants of a dreadnought, transforming it into an abomination that served as his vessel within the material universe. With his newfound power, the Demon Prince desecrated the Star Fort, turning it into a warp-linked fortress that would serve as a gateway for a veritable demon army. And under his command, these forces surged forth, joining the Iron Warriors in a campaign that threatened the very fabric of Ultramar. But Hansu's machinations did not end there. With a twisted stroke of dark genius, he acquired a clone of Uriel Ventress that had been made when Uriel Ventress had been stuffed within the Demonculaba. This clone, known as a newborn, was an amalgamation of the physical traits of Ventress created with the genetic material that Uriel Ventress had left behind, which had unintentionally been subjected to the Demonculaba's machinations on Murdengrad. The newborn was not merely a clone, as he also carried the physical skills and fragments of Ventress's very own memories, including secret knowledge of the Ultramarines' defense protocols, essentially giving Hansu the keys to the kingdom. Hansu, exploiting this knowledge, used the newborn to assault the very heart of the realm of Ultramar, beginning with a star fort and escalating to an all-out war. In response, the Ultramarines rallied their forces, calling upon allies from across the Imperium to stand their ground against the swirling tides of chaos. These included a contingent of Adeptus Mechanicus led by Magos Locard, a unit of Raven Guard Space Marines alongside the Ultramar Auxilia Planetary Defense Forces, and even a warband under Inquisitor Zaxu. Civilian forces would also be drawn from several worlds within the Ultramar system to join the brouhaha. The conflict would then explode across multiple worlds, with every planet almost assuredly falling to the rampaging forces of Hansu and Makar alongside the demon army. One of these worlds, now lost to history, was completely obliterated under the might of the swirling armies of chaos. Yet despite these overwhelming odds, Uriel Ventress remained steadfast, unyielding even, refusing to allow the legacy of Ultramar to be extinguished. The war would culminate in the final confrontation on the world of Kelf, the birthplace of Uriel Ventress, a world with an immense significance to both the Ultramarines, and to word-bearers like Makar. Hansu, at the behest of Makar, ventured into the tomb of Remus Venetus, an ancient hero of the Fourth Company, with the explicit goal of desecrating the tomb and destroying the war gear of Venetus. Ventress, however, would not allow this desecration to stand. In a moment of intense personal and strategic importance, Uriel confronted the newborn, knowing full well that this clone was a twisted reflection of himself, created by forces he could neither control nor comprehend. Their battle was brutal, as Uriel struck down what amounted to his twin brother, using the Venetus Blade, an artifact of immense power forged for the destruction of the enemies of Ultramar. The conflict between Ventress and Hansu reached its zenith shortly thereafter. Hansu and his forces, though numerically superior, was defeated through a sudden and unexpected turn of events. Spectral guardian warriors, seemingly summoned from Venetus' very tomb, appeared in the midst of battle, turning the tide in the favor of the Ultramarines. Hansu detonated the explosive that he had preset around the tomb of Venetus, bringing the structure to a violent explosion that buried both him and his forces within its ruins. In the aftermath of this battle, Uriel Ventress and his surviving warriors moved swiftly to Talsar, where Makar and his demons were, then prevented them from overwhelming Chapter Master Marnius Calgar alongside his remaining forces. In the midst of this final decisive battle, Uriel Ventress threw the blade that had summoned the spectral army towards Calgar, who used it to annihilate the demon prince once and for all. With their master destroyed, the connection of the demon army to the material world shattered, and Hansu's forces were obliterated in their totality, sans Hansu. With the realm of Ultramar once again secured and the forces of chaos defeated, the Imperium began a series of mopping up operations in order to cleanse the last remnants of this demon incursion. Within 6 months, the system was declared free and secure from chaos, and this hard-fought victory had become a symbol of the Ultramarines' glory and greatness. Yet the remains of Hansu were never discovered, leaving his fate to be as much a mystery as any other within the galaxy. Following the catastrophic defeat of the Iron Warriors with their unsuccessful invasion of the realms of Ultramar at approximately 999 M41, a new, even greater threat loomed. With the fall of Cadia and the beginning of the 13th Black Crusade's next campaign, the Lord of the Black Legion launched a full-scale assault across almost the entirety of the Imperium. In the wake of Cadia's collapse, a prophecy of sorts had begun to unfold, one that would shift the balance of the long war evermore. Amongst the first to learn of these disturbing events was Zarfiston, a chaos sorcerer of rather remarkable ability to gaze into the warp. Through his dark sorceries, Zara discovered a profound truth, one which no one had expected. Archmagus Dominus Belisarius Cull, an ancient figure, had actively escaped Cadia's destruction with a device that could potentially alter the course of the war and humanity as a whole. It was believed that this device was the culmination of Cull's millennia of research, one that would serve as the penultimate weapon of humanity against the forces of chaos. Further complicating matters, Cull and a band of survivors, now calling themselves the Celestian Crusade, had escaped not only the ravages of Cadia, but had also garnered the aid of the Eldari Yunari. This group sought refuge in the Webway, an ancient mysterious network of portals, and from there they would make their way to Macragge, the homeworld of the Ultramarines. Their arrival at the heart of the realm of Ultramar posed a direct challenge to Abaddon's plans of conquest. To eliminate this new threat, Abaddon dispatched a portion, a rather significant one, of his Black Fleet, in essence creating another chaos incursion straight to the heart of the Ultramar subsector. This was now an ongoing part of the 13th Black Crusade, as the forces of chaos would then descend upon the homeworld of the Ultramarines, leading the Celestian Crusade to arrive on Macragge, led by figures of both significance to the Imperium and the wider galaxy. At the helm of the Celestian Crusade was Saint Celestine, the living saint who had once come to defend Cadia during its darkest hour. Accompanying them were Archmagus Belisarius Cull, an ancient figure with knowledge of the God Emperor's great works, who had had direct contact with the God Emperor in a manner of speaking. They were also accompanied by Inquisitor Katarina Greyfax of the Order Hereticus. Also amongst their crusade were Marshal Marius Almrak of the Black Templars, alongside Yanari leaders such as Yvraine, the Daughter of Shades, and her war leader, the Vasarch. Upon their arrival, the Celestians found the shrine world of Lypris in the Macragge system overrun by the forces of chaos. Initially caught by surprise, the Celestian Crusade, alongside their Eldari allies, quickly engaged in combat against Chaos Helldrakes, freeing local Ultramarines forces and gaining permission from the Ultramarines to continue their mission, though the Ynnari chose to withdraw the majority of the forces back into the Webway in order to address their own critical matters. The crusade would proceed to Macragge, where they would discover Chaos had also launched a full-scale invasion of the Ultramarines' capital. In orbit, the fleets of Loyalists and Chaos Space Marines clashed in a brutal space battle, while on the ground, the fortress of Hera, the mighty fortress of the Ultramarines, was under direct siege by the forces of Abaddon and his Black Legion. Within the heart of this conflict, Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Kull made an astounding revelation directly to Marinius Calgar, the chapter master of the Ultramarines. Kull, who was over 10,000 years old at this time, revealed that he had once worked closely with Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, during the Horus Heresy, before Guilliman was gravely wounded by the demon prince Fulgrim. Kull had been entrusted by him to complete a mission, to find a means of resurrecting him, should this necessity ever arise. With this knowledge, the Celestian Crusade gained access to the Temple of Correction, where Guilliman's body had been placed in a state of perpetual stasis. Though Calgar remained deeply cautious about the presence of these new arrivals, in particular the Eldari, this crisis had forced the Ultramarines' hands. With Kull now preparing to attempt the impossible, the Celestians and their allies agreed to support the effort directly. As Kull began to work on Guilliman, the Black Legion immediately took notice of this disruption within the warp. Fearing that the Imperium was about to gain a potential weapon in the form of a reborn Primarch, the Black Legion launched a vicious assault on the Temple of Correction, hoping to prevent Kull from completing his task. The defenders, consisting of the Celestian Crusade, the Ultramarines, and Grey Knights from the Third Brotherhood, led by Grandmaster Aldrich Voldos, fought valiantly to buy Kull just enough time to complete his mission. However, the defenders found themselves overwhelmed by Dreadclaw assault boats, descending from the sky as if they were a blizzard, continuously bringing forth more of Abaddon's forces into the brouhaha. Just as it all seemed lost, Yvraine, the leader of the Ynnari, called upon the power of Ynid, the Eldari god of the Dead. The intervention of this ancient deity, coupled with Kull's arcane technology, allowed for the impossible to happen. Roboute Guilliman was resurrected, and the Imperium had a Primarch once more. To ensure his survival, Kull had brought him a reliquary from Mars, which contained the legendary Armor of Fate, a new suit of Primarch-sized power armor specifically designed for Guilliman. This armor was then further enhanced by Eldari soul magic, and it was instrumental in capturing and restoring Guilliman's soul to his body, and preventing it from being forever lost to the afterlife. It was this armor that allowed the Primarch to endure the cleansing of the Chaos-tainted poison that had been injected into his body by Fulgrim, and to restore the damage that had been done to his soul previously. Despite this monumental success, the Banner of the Resurrection left Guilliman bound to the Armor of Fate for the remainder of his days, or at least that's how it was viewed. Without it, Kull feared that the Primarch would quickly perish once more. Nonetheless, Roboute Guilliman had returned, and the Imperium now gained a tremendous boon in their most desperate hour, and his revival marked the dawn of a new era in this long war. This would lead to the birth of the Terran Crusade and the return of Guilliman, which would significantly renew hopes of humanity, halting the ever-encroaching forces of chaos. But even as the Ultramarines and their allies celebrated this victory, the shadow of the Black Legion continued to loom large, as the future of humanity was still perilously balanced on the knife's edge. The resurrection of Roboute Guilliman, one of the Emperor's loyal sons, marked not only a turning point for Ultramar, but for the entirety of the Imperium of Man. As the Primarch awakened, his fury was now unparalleled, and he managed to surge forth with a might that drove back the forces of chaos, with a ferocity that the Black Legion had been utterly unprepared for. In a single moment of vengeance, Guilliman shattered the attacking fortresses and invigorated the Ultramarines alongside their allies, who had been embroiled in the siege of the fortress of Hera, to drive back the darkness. Once the dominant Black Legion forces were overwhelmed, the Loyalists were able to make a decisive victory. This sudden and completely lopsided victory would prove pivotal not only in breaking chaos, but into shifting the balance across Ultramar and the Imperium's infrastructure as a whole. With the return of Guilliman, the Ultramarines were reinvigorated, their morale soaring to heights not seen in centuries, nay millennia. Within mere months, Guilliman had led the Imperial forces to drive back the invaders from Macragge and pushed them completely out of the Ultramar subsector, restoring the realm of Ultramar to its former glory. With the threat of chaos momentarily quelled, Guilliman assumed his role as Lord of Macragge and Primarch of the Ultramarines, taking command not only of the Ultramarines but also of their successor chapters. Marneus Calgar, ever the loyal son to his Gene father, humbly ceded control of his chapter to the Avenging Son, ensuring the continuation of the Primarch's legacy. Yet Guilliman's vision for the future would prove maybe too ambitious, as he declared that the unification of the once spread worlds of Ultramar in order to re-establish the powerful mini-empire it had once been during the golden age of the Imperium, with 500 settled worlds coming once more under the direct control of Macragge. This monumental decision would redefine the fate of Ultramar and the Imperium as a whole, as this was in essence Legion building, as Guilliman had pulled its far-flung worlds back into alignment with the leadership of the Primarch. In the months that followed Chaos's defeat, Guilliman turned his focus to an even greater and more personal mission, his long-awaited journey to Terra, to reunite with his father, the Emperor of Mankind. After millennia of separation, it was time to head back home. To accomplish this, Guilliman gathered a vast fleet from across the Imperium, setting out on what would become known as the Terran Crusade. As the warp itself had become increasingly unstable in the wake of the 13th Black Crusade, the Primarch's very own fleet had begun its perilous journey back to Terra. However, the fleet's first voyage would not be without peril. As it neared the infamous Maelstrom, a great rift within the fabric of reality itself, the Terran Crusade's fleet was intercepted by a formidable enemy, Magnus the Red, the demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns. Magnus had long remained on his demon world, adjacent to his lost homeworld of Prospero, but recently he had stirred from his centuries-long slumber to wage war against the Space Wolves and to reassert his power within real space. Now he would turn his attention towards Guilliman, his former beloved brother, and his fledgling Terran Crusade. Magnus's sorcerer's powers were rather formidable, and in a single act of unbridled rage, the Thousand Suns Primarch cast an ancient ritual that flung the Terran Crusade into the heart of the very Maelstrom. Trapped within this labyrinthian rift within the warp, time became fluid and unpredictable. The fleet wandered aimlessly, navigating from demon world to demon world, suffering countless assaults from the very legions of chaos that lurked within the rift. The horrors of the Maelstrom weighed heavily on Guilliman's psyche. For the first time in his life, he found himself struggling with the crushing burden of guilt and frustration, the knowledge that the fate of the Imperium now rested on his shoulders alone. Yet despite the mounting losses and the despair that threatened to overwhelm them, the Imperium's forces had a faint glimmer of hope, as Eldrad Ulthrain, the ancient Eldari Farseer, now allied with the Yunari, sent a message to Guilliman, revealing a series of landmarks that would allow his fleet to navigate the treacherous warp rift and find their way back to real space. But even as the Imperial fleet neared its potential escape, the forces of chaos were not finished with them. The fleet encountered a new and terrifying threat, the forces of the Red Corsairs, and this detachment of Space Marines was led by the powerful Lord of Change, Kairos Fateweaver. This dark entity was a greater demon of Tzeentch, and it unleashed a brutal assault upon the fleet, engaging in a battle with the few remaining vessels of this Imperial Crusade. In the midst of this conflict, Kairos Fateweaver, using his potent psychic abilities, turned the tide of battle with a devastating psychic assault, as he ensnared Guilliman in chains woven from the very guilt that had branded the Primarch's immortal soul. Immobilized and powerless to fight back, Guilliman was confronted with a harsh ultimatum: his life for the lives of the fleet. Kairos used his power to bind Guilliman, forcing the remainder of the Imperial fleet to surrender. Thus, the Terran Crusade would meet its crushing defeat. The once mighty fleet felled, and the hopes of countless soldiers and officers now were at the mercy of chaos. The Primarch, the very symbol of the Imperium's strength, lay imprisoned in chains, his fate uncertain, and the future of the Imperium of Mankind now hung in the balance. In this moment, everything relied on Guilliman's being able to get over his guilt and act. In the wake of the failure of the Terran Crusade, the forces of the Imperium found themselves on the precipice of annihilation, trapped within the Maelstrom and hunted by the forces of chaos, under the command of Kairos Fateweaver. The Red Corsairs brought the once proud fleet back to its legendary Blackstone Fortress, one of the most powerful relics available to humanity, be they aligned with Chaos or the God Emperor. This was no ordinary fortress, as it was a secret gift from Abaddon the Despoiler, and the last remaining Blackstone Fortress in the hands of Chaos, and it was intended to become the prison for these loyalist forces. Here, the remnants of Guilliman's Terran Crusade would have languished for eternity, their fate sealed sealed by the treachery of Chaos, had it not been for the sudden and unexpected intervention of Kegarath, as the Eldari Harlequins, the most mysterious of the Eldar factions, led by Shadowseer, Sindril, Balewalker, entered the fray. Known for their strange loyalties and their ability to adapt and navigate the intricacies of fate, the Harlequins were not the obvious saviors that the Imperium had desired. Yet they arrived at the pivotal moment. Alongside them came Cypher, a figure whose loyalties border on the unknown and ambiguous at best. Once an Astartes of the Dark Angels, Cypher was a being who had walked the line between friend and foe, forever entwined with mystery and secrecy, often acting as an ally to loyalist forces despite his affiliation with the fallen Dark Angels, in exchange for a promise that the fallen would be brought before the Golden Throne, a promise that could only be fulfilled under the most uncertain of terms. Cypher freed Guilliman and his companions from the grasp of Chaos. With their starships lost and their crews sacrificed to the whims of the ruinous powers, the Imperial forces had little left to rely on. But Balewalker had another plan, offering the only viable path to salvation, the Webway, which was a complex system of tunnels that navigated just outside reality, across the entirety of the galaxy, and this would be the route that Guilliman and his surviving forces would take. At the heart of the Blackstone Fortress, the Harlequins opened a webway portal, offering a chance for the Terran Crusade to reach Terra. Its path through the webway was not without dangers, for the labyrinthian dimension was a treacherous and unpredictable place. As Magnus the Red, the demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, had long made his domain within a particular pathway, with his legion at his command, he sought to ensure his former brother, Guilliman, would never reach Terra unchallenged. As the Imperial fleet successfully navigated throughout the webway, they would soon discover that Magnus had already prepared for their arrival. The demon Primarch, ever the schemer, had anticipated the possibility of the Loyalists' escape, and upon the webway exiting into the Sol system, he unleashed his Thousand Suns upon the defenders of Terra. His plan was to strike at the heart of the Imperium, not only slaying the only remaining Loyalist Primarch, but also claiming the glory that Abaddon the Despoiler seemingly had failed to for 10,000 years. Yet as the forces surged onto Terra's doorsteps, Guilliman and his Imperial Crusade did not yield. Supported by the Harlequins and allied forces of Sisters of Silence and Imperial Fists, Guilliman engaged in one final battle to protect the Imperium. In a harrowing confrontation, the forces of the Imperium overwhelmed the Thousand Suns, forcing Magnus and his followers to retreat back through the webway portal he had commanded. The portal itself was then sealed, locking it forever and ensuring that no Chaos force would ever gain the use of the webway to threaten the throne world. With the Thousand Suns thwarted, Guilliman and the remnants of his crusade finally reached the hallowed halls of the Imperial Palace on Terra. The surviving Celestian and Terran Crusaders went their separate ways, but the significance of this moment could not be understated. After 10 millennia of absence, Roboute Guilliman stood once again before the Emperor of Mankind, and the Primarch once more walked upon the cradle of humanity. The two reunited, though the content of their conversation remains as much a mystery as anything else. What was said in this private meeting was only to be known by the Primarch and the Emperor, but the implications would be felt across the galaxy. When Guilliman emerged from the inner palace, he was not the same man who had departed Macragge so many years ago. He had taken the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium and the Imperial Regent, a position of immense power and responsibility. With this declaration, Guilliman vowed to rebuild the Imperium to its once former glory, rallying the disparate forces of humanity in a campaign to fight against the forces of Chaos. His vision was to forge the mightiest fleet and armies seen since the Great Crusade, and to revive his father's dream, where humanity would once again stand triumphantly against the forces who had betrayed it and sought to undo it during the tragedy that was Old Night. Up next would be the Battle of Lion's Gate. As the 13th Black Crusade marked a turning point for the Imperium, the oppressive shadow of the Noctis Atrena, a climactic event which caused the Great Rift to tear the galaxy asunder, led to the Astronomicon flickering and vanishing for a time, left the galaxy without light. But even as this galaxy-wide unprecedented darkness occurred, Guilliman took charge. In the wake of the battle, Guilliman found himself at the helm of the Imperium's forces in a desperate attempt to survive. Aware that the fate of humanity rested upon his shoulders, he ordered the cessation of Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call's 10 millennia of work, setting into motion the activation of the Ultima Founding, the creation and the reveal of the Primaris Space Marines. This decision could not have come at a more critical juncture, as this new generation of super soldiers emerged from their millennia-long stasis beneath the surface of Mars, as a new threat had just appeared upon the horizon. A vast host of demons summoned from the bloodlust of Khorne himself, the god of blood and slaughter. They descended upon holy Terra in a bid to claim the Emperor's skulls before Abaddon could. This onslaught of demonic horrors came at a time when Terra had been temporarily bereft of psychic protection due to the flickering of the Astronomicon, leaving it vulnerable to an invasion of unimaginable proportions. But Guilliman, aided by the defenders of Terra, including Trajan Valoris, would not allow the world to fall. The demons, led by an unrelenting fury of cornate butchers, were met with the full might of the Imperium's force on the throne world, and they were decisively crushed in the battle that would become known as the Battle of Lion's Gate, wherein the demons were stopped at the titular Lion's Gate. Amidst the galaxy-wide suffering, Guilliman began organizing what would become known as the Indomitus Crusade, a campaign intended to push back the darkness that had been unleashed by the Great Rift tearing humanity's universe asunder. His primary concern was the protection of his own realm, Ultramar, which had once been a bastion of stability across the galaxy. Fearing the worst, Guilliman dispatched a portion of the Ultramarines and their successor chapters to safeguard their homeworlds. Amongst them were some of the first Primaris Space Marines, fresh from the release of their creation on the surface of Mars. This force assembled into a fleet known as Fleet Avenger, commanded by the renowned Captain Cato Sicarius. However, the journey to Ultramar would not be without difficulties. The fleet, crossing the galaxy in a desperate bid to reach their destination, ran headfast into a series of warp storms of unprecedented ferocity, echoing those which had occurred during the turbulence of the Age of Strife. The storms tore the fabric of reality asunder, scattering the fleets into the abyss. The command ship of Fleet Avenger, the Emperor's Will, became embroiled in a storm, drifting dangerously off course. During this tumultuous time, the Astronomicon, the guiding light of the Emperor, had flickered and faded in what was known as the Noctis Aeterna, making things all the harder. As the fleet's ships splintered and scattered, a final transmission was sent from the Emperor's Will. It was a fleeting astropathic message, distorted by the unprecedented and unpredictable waves of psychic energy that ravaged the galaxy at this time. But the last words were a desperate plea, and that plea was, "They have breached the hull. They are here." Despite the overwhelming odds, Fleet Avenger ultimately did make it to Ultramar, carrying with them the newly minted Primaris Space Marines, and their hopes of improving the chances for the Imperium's survival had reached Macragge. But the Emperor's Will, the flagship, was never heard from again, and its fate remains a mystery, even to the most astute and well-read of Imperial scholars. Despite the overwhelming odds, it seems half of Fleet Avenger ultimately successfully made it to Ultramar, carrying enough forces to link up with the Ultramarine Second Company, which fell under the control of Captain Sevatus Archean, as Sicarius had seemingly disappeared within his ship. The Ultima founding had officially begun, but the road ahead would be rather perilous, as the Primaris Space Marines and their newfound commanders would soon find themselves in an even greater struggle. As the 41st millennium grew to its tumultuous end, the Imperium found itself splintered and broken. The Great Rift, or as it's more commonly known as, the Cicatrix Maledictum, had cleaved the galaxy in twine. This vast, seething belt of warp storms raged across the galaxy, wreaking havoc across all those who dwelled within its reach. Unholy demon legions poured forth from the Immaterium, numbering in ways previously unimaginable, while time itself began to warp and distort, fracturing under the pressure of these impossible forces. To track the flow of war, once a linear and comprehensible concept, now became a nigh impossible task, a maddening exercise for any of those who attempted to understand it. Within its chaos, the very fabric of warp travel became increasingly perilous, an obstacle that left countless of Imperial worlds isolated from one another. This isolation posed an existential threat, especially within Imperium Nihilus, the segment beyond the Great Rift, where the Astronomicon's light had been permanently snuffed out, flickering only occasionally as a distant beacon. The Imperium's fate was now in jeopardy, yet even amidst this calamity, the Ultramarines remained in command, with their commitment not only to defend Ultramar, but the entirety of humanity. Their duty was to protect the Emperor's realms, and they would not waver in accomplishing this task. The response to this unprecedented crisis was the formation of the Indomitus Crusade, a massive military campaign that would dwarf all others in its scope and ambition. Unlike many who had sought to shelter behind their defenses, some Imperial forces chose to strike out against the dying of the light. Few fueled by a favor to reclaim what was lost, and to extract vengeance upon their enemies. While some of these crusading fleets would succeed, many would be overwhelmed and lost to the void. However, one mission stood above all others, the Indomitus Crusade, which launched directly from Terra, under the direct leadership of Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines. The Indomitus Crusade was not just a campaign, but rather it was a rebirth of the Great Crusade, though this time it would be led by the Primaris Space Marines rather than their firstborn counterparts. These newly created soldiers, crafted through the work of Archmagus Dominus Belisarius Call, would be a linchpin in humanity's survival, as these soldiers would serve as the vanguard of the Crusade, fighting alongside other Imperial forces, including the Adeptus Custodes, the Adeptus Sororitas, and the Sisters of Silence, alongside with multiple battle groups of Astra Militarum and Navis Imperialis. Together they would form a vast, nigh unstoppable force that would spread out from Terra in order to take the fight directly to their enemies. The crusading fleets also carried the feature of the Imperium within them, waves upon waves of Primaris Space Marines, and the technology to create more Primaris Space Marines, and they were designed to bolster the ranks of the beleaguered Adeptus Astartes chapters throughout the galaxy. With them came the crucial Magos Biologists, adept tech priests who would ensure that every Space Marine chapter would have the means to create their own Primaris reinforcements, ensuring that as war unfolded, their ranks would swell in numbers sufficient to match those of the growing threats of chaos. Amongst the many fleets that made up the Indomitus Crusade, one stood at the forefront. This was Indomitus Crusade Fleet Primus, commanded by Roboute Guilliman directly. With him sailed the mighty Zar Questor, the Arch Mechanicus flagship of Belisarius Cull, within which thousands of Primaris Space Marines still slept in stasis, waiting for the moment that they would wake to join the fight. This fleet would travel through the perilous warp jumps together, spreading slowly and relentlessly throughout Segmentum Solar, into the furthest reaches of Segmentum Tempestus, Segmentum Pacificus, and Segmentum Obscurus. The forces accompanying Guilliman were not solely composed of newly formed Primaris Space Marines. The fleet supported the enduring strength of the Space Marines of Ultramar along with their successor chapters, which included seasoned veterans of the earlier Terran Crusade, as well as newly minted Primaris warriors. Some of these forces had already been engaged in battles across the galaxy, continuing their campaigns in the wake of the Great Rift's opening. These forces would become united completely under Guilliman's banner, whose leadership brought renewed hope to the beleaguered Imperium. As the Indomitus Crusade stretched further and further still throughout the ravaged, war-torn regions of the Imperium, the Ultramarines and their successor chapters found themselves fighting upon hundreds of disparate battlefields, engaged in countless conflicts against demons, Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Titans, and even mercenaries from the crew, amongst others. The threat they faced was more than just a struggle for survival. It was a battle for the very soul of the Imperium and humanity as a whole. The Indomitus Crusade was a desperate push to reclaim territories, bolster the Imperium's shattered defenses, and renew the Emperor's dream of a united galaxy under humanity's rule. The vastness of this crusade could not be overstated, as every fleet, every battle group, and every soldier played a pivotal role in the broader effort to restore balance. The newly formed Primaris Space Marines, led by seasoned captains and commanders from the Firstborn, would face some of the fiercest and most dangerous enemies the galaxy had ever known. The tide of battle would ebb and flow across the galaxy, but one thing was certain: the Imperium would not stand idly by and go quietly into that long and dreadful night. The Indomitus Crusade, despite its many trials and tribulations, marked the beginning for the Imperium's return to war on a galactic scale. In the chaotic, war-torn 41st millennium, few moments would stand as pivotal as the War of the Beasts, a brutal conflict which unfolded on the world of Vilgus, a planet strategically located in the mouth of the Necmund Gauntlet. This incredibly rare, yet stable passage between Imperium Sanctus and Imperium Nihilus was a vital artery for the survival of humanity and the Imperium as a whole. Had this world fallen, the consequences for the entire Imperium and the Indomitus Crusade would have been catastrophic. A powerful and prophetic vision would set the stage for one of the most crucial engagements of this era upon this world. Chief Librarian Virgo Tigerius, the greatest psyker of the Ultramarines, had foreseen that if Vigilus was lost, the repercussions for the defense of the Emperor's realms could be devastating. The Librarius of the Ultramarines was held in high regard for their wisdom and foresight, and when Tigerius spoke, the wise would not hesitate to listen. Tigerius's vision came at a most crucial of moments, when Marnius Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines, was en route to Vanitas 9, when Tigerius's astral projection reached him. The dire warning called for an immediate action. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Calgar shifted his course towards Vigilus, knowing full well that time was of the essence. However, this journey was not without cost. The Ultramarine Psychers, guided by Targaryen's prophecy, leapt across the dark turmoil of Imperial Nihilus, where warp travel had become unstable and hazardous. The toll was rather steep, with many Psychers perishing through this perilous journey. Yet, despite their sacrifices, the Ultramarines succeeded in arriving at Vigilus just in time to take command of the planet's defenses. Upon their arrival, they found Vigilus being besieged by more than just the normal forces of orcs and gene stealers. They discovered a world on the brink of collapse, governed by a weak, self-serving ruling council. Calgar, swift in his judgment, purged all those who comprised the council along with their families, retaining only those few whom he deemed loyal and trustworthy. He swiftly installed a new leadership, consolidating control and setting the stage for a decisive counteroffensive. He dispatched vanguard marines to nearby worlds, gathering intelligence and securing vital resources. Meanwhile, Calgar and the Ultramarines rallied the defenders of Vigilus, preparing them for the coming storm. The threat to Vigilus, however, was more insidious than they had initially realized. Reports of strange phenomena began to spread across the entirety of the world. Bat-winged figures haunting the tallest spires of the Hive sprawls, rumors of abductions amongst the planet's elites, and unsettling fluctuations in the skies where the edges of the Great Rift seem to blacken with an unnatural force. All signs that pointed towards something more ominous, an imminent invasion of chaos forces. The Emperor's tarot readings were clear and undeniable. The Demon Blade, the Herald of Darkness, the Knight of the Abyss, symbols of a forthcoming conflict with the archenemy. As the shadows of chaos grew ever closer, the invasion that was prophesied soon arrived. The Black Legion, now under the combined leadership of Abaddon the Despoiler alongside his new commanders, descended upon the world with a terrifying ferocity. Abaddon's objectives were to seize Vigilus and eliminate the world's ability to maintain control of the Nakmund Gauntlet. This was a crucial objective for him, as if the Nakmund Gauntlet remained open, the deposits of altered blackstone which were within Vigilus could be exploited by the Imperium, and it was one of the few places due to these deposits that were keeping the Gauntlet stable. Without Vigilus, the already tenuous connection between Imperium Sanctus and Imperium Nihilus would be severed, cutting off vital supply lines and reinforcements from Sanctus to Nihilus. The clash between Abaddon's Chaos forces and the Imperial defenders was rather brutal. The Orc Speedwa had already set the planet ablaze, launching a vicious assault on Vigilus, and its arid oceans alongside its hive sprawls were filled with gene stealer cultists. Meanwhile, the infiltration of the planet's populace had led to widespread revolts. For a time, the forces of the Imperium were scattered, disorganized, and fragmented, with competing factions vying for control. The leadership of Marneus Calgar and the Ultramarines, however, united these disparate forces and gave them the direction they so desperately needed. Against all odds, the Imperium held firm. Despite the overwhelming forces and incredible power of the Black Legion, the Ultramarines, alongside their allies, managed to stave off Chaos's forces, though the world suffered immense losses and the destruction of vast swaths of its life. The vital world of Vigilus remained within Imperial hands. The forces of the arch-enemy, though they held sway over several of the planet's hive sprawls, were unable to secure the world or push back the Imperial defenders in any significant way, leading the locus of conflict to shift away from Vigilus to other corners of the galaxy. In the aftermath of the War of the Beasts, Vigilus, though scarred and devastated, began its long journey towards recovery. However, new reports of the occurrences within the Nakmund Gauntlet seemed to put its status at a very tenuous place. Up next would be the Plague Wars. The Plague Wars stand as one of the more grim chapters in the history of the Ultramarine, an unprecedented conflict that saw the Ultramar sector face their greatest challenge in centuries. These wars, born of a confluence of cosmic chaos and horrors unimaginable, the opening of the Noctis Anaterna, and the birth of the Great Rift, led to the unrelenting advance of Nurgle and his followers, the Chaos God of decay and pestilence. At the heart of the Plague Wars was a battle not only for the survival of Ultramar, but for the seat of the Imperium itself. Ultramar, the realm of Primarch Roboute Guilliman, had long stood as a beacon of order and hope amongst the storm of war that was the galaxy. Its worlds were prosperous, its defenses formidable, and it was perpetually loyal. Yet even before the Noctis Anaterna shattered the fabric of the galaxy and birthed the Great Rift in 999 M41, Ultramar faced threats on multiple fronts. The Tyranid Hive fleets, just just to mention one, threatened to consume Guilliman's empire, while notorious orc warlord and the arch-arsonist of Caradon led massive orc wogs in order to overrun the eastern defenses of Ultramar. However, none of these threats matched the scale or malice of the coming plague. The Plague Wars began in the wake of the Rift's appearance, when the forces of Nurgle, led by the demon Primarch Mortarion and his Death Guard Legion, descended upon the once thriving world of Ultramar. These vile forces brought with them supernatural plagues and virulent demons, infecting the very soil and tainting it with their putrid corruption. Some historians argue that the Plague Wars began even before the Great Rift, with the minions of Nurgle's earlier incursions within the realm of Ultramar. But it was only after the Great Rift tore open the galaxy that the full scale of the conflict became evident. The infestation spread like wildfire across Ultramar and beyond into the neighboring sector of the Scourge Stars. Here, the forces of chaos unleashed plague-based horrors such as crawling pestilence, eye rot, oozing pox, and a myriad of other diseases that ravaged planets and sent populations spiraling into madness and decay. As the forces of Nurgle overwhelmed world after world, seemingly without stop, the Imperial defenders found themselves constantly on the back foot, struggling to stem the plague's advance. Nurgle's influence was not only spread through physical illness, but also through chaos cultists who sowed dissent, turning Imperial defenders against their own ranks. In some systems, entire battalions fell to the corrupting whispers of their heretical leaders, sealing the fates of once proud worlds who would now fall under the grip of Grandfather Nurgle. It was in the midst of this suffering that Mortarion, demon Primarch of Nurgle's Death Guard, launched his most devastating assault, the invasion of Ultramar. From the newly won Scourge Stars, Mortarion staged a series of raids, striking out in waves. These early incursions were intended to weaken the resolve and test the defenses of the Ultramarines, all the while preparing the grounds for a more extensive invasion. However, the Ultramarines' response was swift, unlike those of the Death Guard, who were slow and crawling. They fought back with everything at their disposal, from the battered forces of Ultramar's defense auxilia to the elite Ultramarines Legion itself. Yet the corrupting forces of chaos pushed forth, relentless in their assault. At the forefront of these battles were the Plague Marines, the twisted soldiers of Nurgle who had launched devastating attacks on Talsar, Ix, Circle, Circe, and Lifis. Some of these engagements were just small skirmishes meant to sow discord or spread virulent contaminants, while others were full-scale offensives that stretched the Ultramarines' defenses to their limits. The Bubonicus legions, led by the Great Unclean One, Kugroth, the Plague Father, engaged in a brutal campaign that saw the fall of the Talarar system and the garden world of Ix. Ix, once rich with life and agriculture, was reduced to a wasteland by Nurgle's malignant forces. While Mortarion's Death Guard Legion rampaged across the Ultramarines' realm, a naval conflict would rage on in the Espandor system, where the Plague Fleet, commanded by Typhus, Lord of Death, waged a brutal war against the Imperium's remaining naval defenses. Despite the Ultramarines' heroic defense, these numerous battles saw the death toll amongst the Imperial forces reach staggering levels. Nevertheless, the Ultramarines held their ground, refusing to succumb to the tide of death and disease that flooded their worlds. In a desperate gamble to save Ultramar, Roboute Guilliman broke away from his duties on the Indomitus Crusade to return to his home. Guilliman, ever the tactician, saw that the only way to reclaim Ultramar was to seize the initiative. He orchestrated a brilliant counteroffensive known as the Spear of Espandor to push back Mortarion's forces. Guilliman and his counterattack were rather swift and deadly by comparison, with a series of rapid strikes aimed at reclaiming ground. His forces targeted Mortarion supply lines, cutting off key reinforcements and launching daring boarding actions across the Chaos Fleet's entirety. The Death Guard, now fighting a series of disjointed campaigns, struggled to adapt to Guilliman's calculated countermeasures. Ultimately, the Chaos forces were made to retreat. However, victory would come at a great price. The retreating Death Guard launched a devastating last-ditch effort, a massive virus bomb on Ix, creating irreparable damage. And despite Guilliman's forces being able to reclaim several worlds, pushing Nurgle's followers to retreat into the Scourge Stars, the battles would still be ongoing. Prior to leaving, Guilliman had a confrontation with his brother within the very Garden of Nurgle, and there he would claim the Emperor's sword, after almost being annihilated. However, right before his moment of death, the Emperor used Guilliman as a vessel, restoring him to his once and former glory, and allowing him to use the full force of the Emperor's sword to not only stop Mortarion, but in order to permanently burn a significant amount of Nurgle's garden, never to be recovered. Afterwards, Guilliman would return to the wider battle, and with the Battle of Ultramar still ongoing, Guilliman once again left for the Great greater warfront, all the while organizing the rebuilding of the shattered defenses of Ultramar, eventually reaching Dante and aiding the Blood Angels to push back Hive Fleet Leviathan. With this, the Ultramarines now set the stage for a renaissance in the Imperium, both militarily and culturally, as the integration of Primaris Space Marines and the shift in how the Imperium functions as a war machine is now able to meet greater threats like the incurring Fourth Tyrannic War, for the first time since the Horus Heresy, bringing about combined arms tactics. This does include forces such as the Adeptus Custodes working alongside the Ultramarines Guilliman and Lord Solar in order to push back this new oncoming threat, who is currently invading Segmentum Solar.